All right, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to today's session. This is a webinar about Microsoft PowerPoint, and specifically about a point within that, building structure and theme in your presentation so that it's as effective as possible. This webinar is going to take about the next 30 minutes or so. And for those of you guys who haven't met me before, my name is Neil, and I'll be showing you around some of the ideas and techniques that will help you to plan out the most effective presentation possible. I'm a Microsoft certified trainer, and after today's session, if you need to follow up with me to ask me additional questions or to get additional resources, please feel free to do so, neil@nactraining.com. Now this is being conducted over any meeting, which means that up at the top of the screen you'll see an icon representing your mic for your computer. If you have a microphone attached to your computer and you'd like to unmute yourself and use that to ask me a question, please feel free to do so. Additionally, if you either don't want to speak up or if you just don't have a mic attached to your computer, you'll see in the bottom left-hand corner that you have your ability to use the chat feature, and that'll go ahead and send me a message that I can then answer as well. So please do feel free to ask any and all questions as they occur to you. And as with all of these webinars this year, they're going to be recorded and put up on YouTube. My YouTube channel is youtube.com/Neil Malik. And so, for example, last month we did a webinar about understanding your audience. And so you can go to youtube.com/Neil Malik and you can check for that webinar. You can watch that at your leisure. And of course, this one will be posted there afterwards as well. Before you came to this webinar, you probably received an email with a link to download a handout. If you did not, or if you need to do this after the fact, you can go to nactraining.com/handouts.aspx. And at nactraining.com/handouts.aspx, you'll see a PDF file, a three-page PDF file that'll help you to understand some of the concepts, some of the strategies that we're going to be talking about over the next 29 minutes or so. And most of these pertain to the idea of being able to understand what a theme is, what the theme of your presentation actually happens to be, and how to build a structure around that theme that will help communicate that theme, help give the right amount of focus to that theme, and sort of trim out any of the extraneous things that you don't necessarily need to be part of your presentation. So once again, this is about theme, and I wanted to sort of give this in context with the larger picture. In 2014, I'll be delivering a series of 9 webinars about how to deliver great presentations. The first of them last month was about how to understand your audience. This one is about how to build theme in your presentation, and the next will be about visual thinking. All 3 of these are what I would call planning out a great message, making sure that your message is properly structured, making sure that you understand what it is you're trying to tell them so that you can put it together in a way that makes as much sense as possible. Now, immediately after this, I'll be doing a webinar about Microsoft Excel, and then I'll be doing another series of 3. And those 3 will be diagrams, slide design, and motion design. And these are about the more typical PowerPoint topics of how to actually design something visually so it's as impactful as possible. Now, I'm not going to say that this isn't very, very important. Of course, being able to make your slides as attractive and as useful and as interesting as possible is a very productive and very helpful thing. But I find that most people are lacking in those first 3 bullet points about being able to plan out your message successfully, and so everything that you do in visual design is just putting lipstick on a pig, as they say. Now again, we'll be taking a short break after those 3 webinars so that everybody can sort of gather themselves, do some thinking about this, and then we'll follow up with 3 more webinars about how to make your delivery as successful as possible. So how do we make you as confident, as dynamic as possible, and some interesting techniques for how to speak in front of groups of people that will capture their attention. And again, every single one of these will be posted to YouTube after the session's over. Beautiful. So in today's session, we're asking the question, what is our theme and how do we structure a presentation to support that theme? And so before I get started, I just want to take a second here. Does anybody have any questions? Is everybody able to hear the sound of my voice clearly? Are there any concerns or issues? Spectacular. So once again, you guys should all have the handout right here. And in there, there's 3 pages. The first is about how to properly organize your thoughts. The second is about how to find the theme of the presentation. And the third is how to work with the structure of your presentation. All right. So to begin with, we have to understand what our theme of the presentation actually is, how we can find this if we don't already know what it is, and then how structure ultimately will help us support that. So we'll begin with what is not the theme of the presentation. Most people begin their presentation building by saying, what is my presentation about? And the answer to that question is usually a simple noun of some kind. Like, my presentation is about our new product, or our presentation is about our sales, or our presentation is about it's about a new process that we have. Or our presentation, if we were talking about a movie, could be about love or war or those sorts of things. But ultimately, these things, these nouns that we're talking about here, these are all the subject of the presentation. They're not the theme of the presentation, they're the subject of the presentation. So the subject of the presentation is our broad understanding of the world that we're talking about. So the subject of a movie, again, might be love, might be war, might be friendship, might be it might be might be Batman, who knows, you know. But the subject of the presentation or the subject of your movie is not the theme. It's just purely the simplest possible explanation for what it is that we're going to be focusing on during the presentation or during the movie. When we decide to have a theme to our movie or a theme to our presentation, what we talk about here is taking that subject and having some sort of take on that subject, some sort of spin on that subject. So we have our subject of sales totals. We might decide that our theme is that even though we do have lower sales totals, that's something that we will be bouncing back from. So this is understanding that there is a single subject, in this case, lower sales totals in the fourth quarter, but having a take on that, something that we decide is our opinion about that thing. In the exact same way, you could take those same lower sales totals, that same subject, and you could have an entirely different take. So different employees within a company might have very different takes on the same subject. So they would have very different themes to their presentations. So if our theme is that we're going to bounce back from our lower sales totals, that's one thing. A different team might have a theme that says, okay, we have lower sales totals, and because of that, we understand that our company is not doing so well, and we need to go ahead and get rid of some of the excess in our company. We need to sell off the underperforming unit so that we're keeping with the strongest parts of our company. So you see there, the same subject twice in a row. Lower sales totals is our subject, but our theme is whatever our opinion about that subject happens to be. Don't worry, we'll bounce back, or we're not going to bounce back and we need to cut our losses on this. If our subject was our new product, our take on that new product might be that we realize that that new product is something that would be very widely understood in Eastern Europe, and we decide that we want to push towards aggressively marketing it in Eastern Europe. Or our new product should be priced at a significant markup. So we have this new product. We might understand certain things about that new product, but I can guarantee you that not everybody in the company is going to have that same opinion that for some reason we should price it as significant markup. A lot of people in the company would say, no, we need to make sure that we compete on price. We need to make sure that we keep the price low so that we can then sell it to more people. Lower prices are always better, might be somebody else's theme. But you may understand that higher prices put us into a different segment of the market, and so we may have that opinion, that push towards pricing it higher. So ultimately, you could then translate this, of course, into movies, right? If you're talking about love is not adequate, right? Every movie that you see has to have a perspective, has to have some sort of opinion that they try to push you over towards. In some cases, it might be that love is the only thing that's important. In other cases, it might be that love is going to distract a genius from something that that genius is capable of doing. The theory behind your movie might be that war could never be the solution to any problem, or it could be that in some cases you must have a war in order to solve a particular situation. So these are the same subject, but very different takes on that same subject. So when we decide to build our presentation, we need to understand not only what our subject is, but then what we might decide to say about it. And finally, one of the last things that we need to make, well, not last things, but one of the things we need to make sure we do before we actually run with this presentation is we need to be able to answer the question of why did we choose the one on the right and not the ones on the left? And here's what I mean by that. On the right, we have a presentation that we're standing up and talking in front of. On the left, we have memos, we have emails, we have phone calls. If all you're trying to do is communicate your subject, the information that other people need to know, why did you not just send an email about that particular subject? Why did you not just call somebody up on the phone? Why did you not just walk over to their desk? Why did you call together a group of people into a room to deliver a presentation? Remember, most people can read your slides much, much faster than you can read them to yourself. So it's important that you have a reason behind gathering everybody together. And ultimately, one of the only reasons I can think of is, well, I'll let the picture speak for itself. If you're going to gather a group of people together and you're going to talk to them for 5 minutes, 15 minutes, half an hour, etc., you need to be steering them towards something, right? If we go back to our original set of bullet points, if we say what we want to do is we want to tell you what our sales totals were in the fourth quarter, well, again, all I have to do is do a couple of quick bullet points in an email, and now everybody in the entire company knows what our sales totals were for the fourth quarter. If I want you to know what the positives and negatives are of our new products, I can send you a quick email, I can send you a document attached to that email that has a rundown of the pros and cons of the new product as it relates to the rest of the competitors out there. So again, the whole point of gathering people together into a presentation is not just communicating the information, not just communicating the subject, but it's in finding the theme that we need to go ahead and sell off an underperforming unit, or that war is never the solution, or whatever idea we happen to have, we need to be able to communicate them, and we need to motivate the people in the room towards that idea. So we need to find ourselves, inside ourselves, our inner William Wallace, as it were. We need to find a way to not only tell them what the subject of the particular presentation is, but we need to be able to communicate the theme, the opinion that you have on that subject. And ultimately, we need to be able to motivate them to our frame of mind. Because if all we do is we say what our sales totals are, I guarantee you that half the room will walk out feeling lousy and the other half will walk out feeling great. And they won't understand why the other group of people has the opinion that they have. We need to motivate everybody to understand what your theme, your perspective is, and agree with that perspective, or come around to that perspective at least. And we also need to give them some sort of mood. A lot of times you'll actually want to give a presentation that will give everybody a little bit of a kick in the pants, right? If your company is not doing well, then your presentation needs to communicate that. And ultimately, not only does it need to communicate that the company is not doing well, but you need to get them around to a particular frame of mind and a particular attitude around that. Let me give you an example of that in real time. So if I decided to take a set of topics and excuse me, and communicate that set of topics, what I need to do is I need to organize my thoughts. And then I need to find some sort of structure that would allow them to see my perspective, my understanding of the situation, and give them the attitude that they can either respond to it in a proactive way, or they can understand where we're coming from as a company. So let's start off with page one of the handout real quickly here. If you flip to the page one of the handout, you'll realize that we talk a lot about the use of Post-its. And that's because Post-its are probably the let me try that again. Post-its are the single strongest way to plan out a presentation that I can think of. And I've always been when I read these books from people like Nancy Duarte, and I'm going to recommend one of Nancy's books to you guys at the end of this session, you'll find a description of how to use Post-its in there that's really rather useful, because when we use Post-its effectively, the nice thing is that they have this small size that's roughly the same size as a slide itself. And if you use a nice big Sharpie, you really can't draw too much stuff on it. And I think most people run into this problem that they put way too much text on any given slide, way too much for people to process, too many different ideas. So what I like to do is I like to take a nice big blank wall in my office, and I like to take a set of Post-its that has 3 colors. And on the first color, you'll see that I always start off with the broad strokes. Okay, over on the left, we have the beginning of the presentation. Over on the right, we have the how we're getting out of the presentation. And in the middle, we have whatever the basic structure is. Am I going to show them what the problem is and generate a solution for them? Do I have action items that they need to follow? What do I need to do? What do I need to communicate with them? Now, once we have those broad strokes up on the wall, we break out the next color of Post-it, and the next color of Post-it goes in there, and we put in our ideas. So this is where we decide to say something like, you know, in the fourth quarter, our sales were down 4.5%. In 2013, our revenue was down by 1.7%, but our profits were up by 0.75%. You know, all of those individual factoids needs to go on these yellow Post-its. And now in the next webinar, when we talk about visual thinking, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get to that next set of Post-its down, the blue ones, or whatever the third color is that you like, where we're deciding to put in an illustration of some kind. So up in the yellow Post-its, we have this idea, and in the blue Post-its, we have different ways of communicating that idea. And like I said, we're going to get to that in March, but just for now, we're going to focus on generating as many yellow Post-its as possible, generating as many ideas as possible, not as many representations for those ideas as possible, but just the ideas themselves. What are these pieces of information I need to present to people? Now, at this stage in the process, what you've done is you've built out your set of topics, your set of speaking points, but you have not yet built what your theme is, and you have not yet built out what the structure that's going to support that theme happens to be. Right now, using those yellow Post-its, what we're doing is we're generating as much volume of ideas as possible, and then we're going to do something with that. So how's everybody doing it so far? Anybody have any questions? Anything they want to discuss? Beautiful. Good, good. All right, so we've spent some time trying to generate ideas, trying to build up a set of ideas that we will ultimately put together in different combinations. And what you'll find is that you get yourself into a situation where you need to ask yourself then, what is your theme? What mood do I want? And what structure can I build towards that with? And let me go ahead and show you a situation where that'd be an actual problem. Okay, so imagine, let's go back a couple of slides. So we're here at this point, and what we want to do after the introduction is generate a set of yellow post-its that describes to our group the situation as it is. And so on each post-it, we're basically putting one of these little bullet points. And here are the bullet points that we have ultimately. 2013 was a down year. The fourth quarter was a positive quarter. The first quarter of the next year is going to be a light quarter. There was a decrease in revenue, there was an increase in profits, and we lost our biggest client. Now, as you go through this, what you should sort of point out to yourself is, okay, these 4 bullet points here have negative information. It was a down year. The first quarter will be a light quarter after our down year. There was a decrease in revenue, and we lost our biggest client. And if we were to describe this information in exactly this order to a group of people, here's the problem. They wouldn't just see the 4 bullet points that are negative, they'd also see the 2 positive bullet points. So intermixed almost perfectly with our negative bullet points are our positive bullet points. And if you were doing what most people do, they just take these ideas and they put them one by one onto different slides. And what they get is confusion. What you'll find is, and this happens all the time, different people work for large companies that I'm friends with. I work for myself, so luckily I don't have this problem. But there are a lot of friends of mine who work for these larger companies, and they almost always get this type of picture, where you get a mix of down information and positive information. And ultimately what you find is that every single time there's a presentation like this for the company, there are a group of people who are naturally negative, who see the negative information, and there are a group of people who are naturally positive, who see the positive information. And so ultimately, when everybody walks out of the room, you get this mix, sometimes 30-70, sometimes 50-50, but there's always a mix of people. Some of these people are seeing the positives, some of these people are seeing the negatives, and ultimately, nobody knows what they're supposed to do. Right? The people who are negative about the information think to themselves, well, I guess we better get out of the company. The people who are positive about the information say to themselves, well, I guess management's got it figured out. And what management was actually hoping for was to get everybody out the door with the same motivation to say, these are the things we can improve, these are the things that are going well, et cetera, et cetera. So by randomly ordering things, we lose that information, we lose that theme. What we need to do is we need to find our theme, and then we need to build a structure around that. Now, we could structure that in this way, so an ascending structure. At the front, we say, okay, 2013 was a down year. We lost 4.5% on revenue from 2012, and the first quarter is going to be a light quarter. But hey, listen, the fourth quarter was way stronger than we expected, and that large client we lost, we've almost replace them at this point with a bunch of smaller clients, all of whom have a great amount of growth potential. So even though we went through this down period, don't worry, we've restructured. We've cut a little bit of the workforce, we've restructured, we've got some of these smaller clients that are going to allow us to grow at a much larger clip in the future. So we have a really positive outlook on things, even though we're coming at a 2013 where it was a very down year. Or we might decide to put it into a negative, a descending structure. 2013 was down. We decided to reduce the workforce. The fourth quarter was a stronger quarter, but now we're already seeing the first quarter is light in sales. And we're taking these bigger customers that we're losing and we're replacing them with smaller customers. So we're really not feeling very good about our current situation. Everybody needs to buckle down. And you can see how the exact same information put together in 2 different orders with different spin on the information gets us to very, very different end results. And this is why you always have to build that theme up front. You have to understand what your opinion is on the information, not just present the information itself. So up top, your theme might be, okay, don't worry. we've went through a down year, but we've gone through some restructuring, and that restructuring's made us a more efficient company. That restructuring has led us to a lot of new customers that are currently not buying a lot from us. So there's a lot of great potential there. The theme on the bottom, hey, 2013 was a tough year for us, and our future is uncertain at this point. You need to know what your opinion is on the information so that you can then put your information in the right order. So at this point, you've gone through page 1 of the handout. Page 1 of the handout talks about how to build out all of those ideas. Make sure that you have post-its for every idea that you want to communicate. Page number 2, what is my subject? What is my take on that subject? And what is the emotion that I want my team to have after the presentation is over? So we're finding our theme on page number 2. And then on page number 3, all we do is we find different ways of organizing that information to help us to communicate whatever that idea happens to be. So a couple of examples here. If we decide to organize our information in chronological order, that could be based off of dates on a calendar, or it could be based on a sort of the point in the process where we are. The nice thing about chronological is, if you're trying to communicate something that's related to the economy or to world events, it's very easy to pinpoint when the economy hit a specific point, when the stock market hit a specific point, when a specific world event occurred, and you're able to pinpoint that date and communicate how that affected what else is happening in your group's structure. Or, of course, you can organize your information in a chronological way by saying, okay, we're currently in the midst of our architecture phase of our project, and we need to get that done by the 8th because we have that period of time where we need to do some executive overview of what's happened in the architecture, and then we're able to roll over into production starting in the middle of May. In a very similar way, sequential allows you to see what the process happens to be. So if we structure our information in our presentation based off of the order that things occur in a given process, people understand that more easily. In a very similar way, we have spatial, right? So if you had to communicate a lot of information, like for example, what's happening in a cockpit, you could not do this in a chronological way. You could not do this in a process-oriented way because there are just far too many things going on here. But spatially, what you can do is you can say, let's pinpoint a part of this area and make sure that we understand how all of these things relate to one another. And then pinpoint another area and understand how all of these things relate to one another. One of my favorites is the climactic, because you always want people to feel like they understand where they're going. So what I like to do when I'm presenting somebody with a set of information that's going to happen over the course of 45 minutes or an hour is I like to find a point that I want to get them to. I want to show them some things that are obviously negative about what they're doing already, about what's happening already, and I want them to feel the building motion of every tool that I give them along the way towards giving them something that is useful and practical. And so climactic can be either of the two processes that we just talked about a little while ago with those post-its, right? If you take all those post-its and you organize them into a structure that allows you to see whether you're crescendoing in a big positive message or in a big negative message, that helps them to understand what they're supposed to feel about the situation. Now, problem and solution, here's the thing about teaching. Whenever I teach, I have to constantly remind myself that I know that there is a problem and that there is a solution to that problem. And a lot of times, the people who come to class, they don't know that there's even a problem in the first place. They have a way of doing something, and it works perfectly well for them. And so they never really take the time to try to find a better way to accomplish something. So in defining a problem, it's a much easier way of getting people to buy into the solution that you're selling. Right? So in my case, it's not too hard to convince people that there are a lot of bad PowerPoint presentations going on out there. So I don't spend a lot of time defining the problems. But in other situations, like for example, the other day I went into a room. I talked to a bunch of people about being able to look at a large spreadsheet of information. And what somebody did was they took this column of information that had last name, comma, first name. And what they did is right next to it, they type out what the person's last name was, and then right next to that, what the person's first name was. And they only had 10 or 15 names, so it wasn't that big a deal. But I stopped them and I said, could we just expand on this for a second? What would happen if you were given a list of names with 500 names in there, or 1,000 or 10,000 names in there? Would you go in and type out everybody's last names and everybody's first names again? And in understanding what that problem really was, they realized that there should be a tool that would help them solve that problem. So that then later, when I showed them that they could take those names and break it up into last name and first name, it made much more sense to them. What you need to understand in a lot of situations is that when you are presenting information or when your team is presenting information, you guys have what is known as the curse of knowledge. And the curse of knowledge is that you know some background information that helps you put into context what's happening in the world. Like, for example, let's say that you work in technical support right now. Now, you know that day in, day out, you handle X number of calls in technical support, and that probably 60% of those calls could be handled by something simple that the rest of the company could implement. Like they could implement a wiki or something like that, and that would free you up to solve a lot more of the calls that are really problematic. But the problem is if you're not communicating that knowledge to everybody else, that the same problem gets handled multiple times every day and that it could be very easily handled by some sort of automated system, then you have that knowledge and you're not communicating that to somebody else. It seems obvious to you that you should be able to focus on something else. It is not obvious to everybody else. So this was described in the book Made to Stick by the Heath brothers. And a big part of the book Made to Stick, and first of all, it should be on everybody's bookshelves right now, because what Made to Stick does is it outlines how to organize your information and how to communicate your information in such a way that it sticks, as the name of the book would lead you to believe. And one of the biggest problems that you run into is that as you're trying to present information to somebody, if you already know a lot of the background behind something and they don't, you may skip over all of that background information. And so the solution may not be nearly as obvious to them. So that's why problem solution presentations are so advantageous. Being able to properly define your problem makes understanding the solution 1,000 times easier. Compare and contrast, I think everybody can understand how you might put two things up on a slide side by side and get understanding of how those two things are different from one another. So for example, when I decide to travel, I almost always have this problem in my head. I know that Southwest is going to be cheaper than Virgin America. And I also know that the trip on Virgin America is going to be a lot nicer than the trip on Southwest. So putting up these two things side by side and being able to compare and contrast the cost versus all the benefits of this makes it a lot easier for me to generate the idea of what my problem is and what the possible solutions to that problem are. Compare and contrast really helps when you're trying to get a group of people to brainstorm with you. Because if you just ask them, hey, what are some ideas that you have for improving our process, you're not going to get a lot of really good information. But when you put two things up on the same slide side by side, they start to picture in their minds what going with either of these two solutions are going to result in. And it gives them a lot of interesting insight into what a good solution is for them and for their situation. Now, cause and effect goes back to our problem and solution. A lot of times okay, so I just told you that you need to properly describe the problem before you get into solving the problem. And what that entails is giving people an understanding of what actually constitutes your problem, whether it's a problem in the first place. So being able to describe your problem through this idea of, okay, here is our cause and here are some effects to that. For example, not nearly enough people read the FAQ before they email into technical support. Here is cause and effect. If nobody reads the FAQ, then the effect is that we get 60% more calls on completely useless things that anybody could have answered with just 10 seconds on the website. So being able to describe what the cause of something is and ultimately what their effects happen to be helps to people to understand what the issue actually is and helps them understand the solutions that are out there. And of course, finally, we have advantage and disadvantage. Almost everybody in the world at this point has made a pros and cons list. And so being able to outline for your audience what the pros and cons are to something, again, helps them to understand that information that you already know, right? So you're getting into understanding these problems. You need them to understand the problems. So being able to compare and contrast those two things, or being able to show the advantages and disadvantages of going two different ways, helps your group get up to speed with what you're doing and understand what solutions that you're presenting to them. All right. So in today's session, what I tried to do was I tried to convey to everybody that at its core, you have a subject to every presentation. It is almost, no, it is universally true. Every presentation has a subject. And that subject is the thing that you're going to talk about. But just understanding what the subject is completely inadequate, because anybody can take away from that subject a very conflicting perspective. So what you need to do is build out your take on this. Build out the theme of the presentation so that you can understand what you're trying to communicate to them and what they should be walking out the door with. This should also involve the mood that you want them to have. Do you want them to be happy about the information that you've presented to them? Do you want them to be upset about that? Do you want them to be motivated about that? What do you want to give them off of the theme that you've presented to them? And finally, you have this theme, you have this understanding of what you actually need to communicate. What kind of structure will allow you to present that information in a useful way? So hopefully the handout with building out what the subjects are, building a theme from that subject, and then ultimately finding the right structure for that theme will help you out. So again, going back to the takeaways, make sure that you guys download the handouts from nactraining.com/handouts.aspx. Again, you can email me after today's session if you'd like to get that attached to an email or something like that. And then for your reading purposes, well, first of all, this is what the handout looks like. For your reading purposes, I'd highly recommend this book by Nancy Duarte called Resonate. I recommended it in the last presentation too, because Resonate gets into the heart of understanding who you're talking to and what message you're trying to convey to them and how to best structure that message. So in today's session and last month's session, we're really getting into the heart of what Resonate is all about. In next month's session, we talk about visual thinking. We'll be talking a lot about the information that Dan Rome has presented in the back of the napkin. So besides Resonate by Nancy Duarte, I'd also recommend that book Made to Stick by the Heath brothers that I talked about a little bit. Again, we're talking about being able to not only take the information that you want to present to people, but to be able to put it into terms and and to structures to help people really take that information away in a meaningful and a useful way to them. So Made to Stick really helps you get to the point of a lot of those things. Beautiful. Ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate your time and energy today. Make sure that you sign up for the visual thinking presentation on the 3rd of March. That'll be just after I have my kid, or my wife has my kid, let's be honest. You can go to knactraining.com and check out the events link to be able to sign up for that session. And again, we'll be talking a lot about diagrams, charts, and pictures, about how we then take those yellow Post-its and turn them into the blue Post-its so that we have a great visualization of whatever it is we're talking about. I appreciate everybody's time and energy. Get back to work, enjoy the rest of your day, and be tremendous at what you do, everybody. Thanks, everybody.